Java Perks. By Chris Lowry. Java Perks. Sundays after Mass, I met with Jacob and Henri in a small cafe on Montoya just a few blocks from St. Peter's. They were always there before me, sipping into a third or fourth cup of coffee, sleep long since caffeinated from their eyes, and I would come in late from talking with the father and camp in the corner with my books to try and catch up. This day I was later than usual, the streets crowded with a deluge of tourists and a midday shower that sent them scurrying for the protection of the awnings, hampering me. I felt like shouting at them, herding them like cattle out of my way, but was too afraid to actually do it. Jacob would have shoved through, and I wished he was with me, or even Henri, who would probably scare a tiny path through with his high-pitched shriek. But I was alone and polite and excused myself every step of so, pushing past the bright shirts and straw hats that belonged in some tropic port and not my beloved quarter. Gators sounded like a biker bar, and the small dark door in an alleyway seemed more a speakeasy than a coffee shop. But my friends and I called it home on Sundays, preferring the solemn smoky interior to the bright bourbon lights. The door looked heavy, but it opened easily into the sunken den, walls peppered with candles and saints' pennants. The low hum of voices faltered as I stepped through, but resumed as the world was shut out behind the door. I walked to the back, shaking off my light overcoat and the uneasiness I had felt in the crowd outside. Jacob was usually sprawled across a chair or so at the low bar, draping his arms across it as if crucified and leaning into it. He was larger, bordering on heavy, and the weight of his shoulders made the mahogany rail sag in the middle. He handed me a mug. I sipped it carefully, blowing the steam off the top first. It was a rough, gritty blend of Delta topsoil and septic water. I tried to hide a grimace from Henri. Jacob caught it though. "You know," he said, "I have traveled the furthest reaches of the world and I've never tasted worse than this." I started at him through the blue-gray haze that floated lazily along the low rafters. "Piss on you," slurred Henri. He was our token expat who spent too much time in France. Jacob and I had a good laugh at his expense often, but he persisted and insisted, so the name caught on. He was Henri instead of Henry to all but his mother and Jacob. "Piss on you, Jacob Earl. You wouldn't know a good cup of Java if you bathed in it." "This tastes like you bathed in it, Henry," Jacob grumbled. He sat up and fixed his gaze on the dark corner where Henri stretched out on the whole bench along one side of the table. I settled into my seat, sliding along the worn leather to rest against the wall. I wondered to myself if they waited for me to arrive before they started arguing, saving their strength for an audience, or if I always walked into a lull, while they were catching a breath and devising a strategy. "I'll dunk your donut ears in my coffee if you don't say my name right," Henri snapped in his prissy voice on the edge of cultured. "It's cauliflower ears, you moron," I said, laughing. "You don't dunk vegetables." They laughed with me, Jacob and Henri competing to see who could attract the most attention. "Coffee is coffee," I said. "I don't think so, Gabe," answered Jacob. "Would you grind some kidney beans and roast them for a blend?" "You animals know butkus of the art of grinding," muttered Henri. "I think I know quite a bit about grinding," deadpanned Jacob. Henri and I smirked at each other. Jacob's largesse with the fairer sex was the stuff of legend among us. "This is an excellent blend of Argentinian and Arabica beans, with nutmeg ground in for that extra perception to the flavor," explained Henri. "Tastes like roast dirt to me," said Jacob. "Tastes like coffee," I put in, an attempt to forestall further discussion. Last week, they almost came to blows over which end of an egg to break. Henri's face blossomed in a red bloom. He sat up too fast and had to grab the table for balance. His cheeks ballooned up and out as he huffed. He threw himself toward Jacob. "Those acting classes are really starting to pay off," Jacob observed. Henri leapt on the bar and perched his skinny frame ominously over Jacob, his head hunched forward like a vulture. "You overdeveloped, undercultured galoot of a man. In all of your famous world travels you never developed a taste for the finer things," he accused. Jacob grimaced as he forced another swallow of the ebon liquid in his stained mug. "I prefer crescent rolls over muffins and biscuits, Japanese women over American, and chocolate sauce on my ice cream," he answered. "I think I know a thing or three about the finger things." "It's croissant, you idiot," I said, going for the laugh again. They stared over at me for a moment to see if I would say something else, but I buried my head in the Book of the Dead. "That's not my point," said Henri. "You've had coffee in what, 33 countries?" 38. 38, and your zombie palate can't tell the difference?" Jacob shook his head. "It's dead then. It's all just shades of bad to me, Henry. After monkey brains and cow tongue soup, Most of the time coffee is just coffee. That's what I said, I chipped in. And this is swill, Jacob finished. Piss on you, Henri sighed. Take my word for it. This is good coffee. You can't find better coffee in this burg, unless I'm making it. Henri was a braggart about his taste and skills. We thought he was a great cook and never hesitated to tell him so. The more often he heard the words, the more he fed us, and free food always seemed to taste better. I always thought the bourbon had good joe, muttered Jacob over the edge of his cup. Please, sniffed Henri. That man stole a recipe from me and ruined it. You have to use the right roast. You want swill, then that's pig spit. We think it's pretty good, Henry, said Jacob. Don't we, Gabe? Let's go over now and get some Olay. I don't know, I answered. It's crowded, and it's raining. I didn't want to leave. Nonsense, get your stuff, he said. Let's go. He slipped into his leather bomber jacket. Why don't you go without me? I'm in the middle of a chapter. And break up a Sunday tradition? Not on your life. Come on, you can read this stuff later. Let's go to Bourbon's. He grabbed the book out of my hand and shoved it into my backpack. Wait, Henri hopped off the bar. I don't want to go to Bourbon's. We're going to go have a good cup of coffee, said Jacob. You stay here and drink your blend. No, said the thin man. I want to be with you guys. But not at Bourbon's. Let's go get some beans and I'll make you a blend at my flat. My own special blend. Then you can see what real coffee should taste like. Jacob scrunched up his face in careful consideration, but he winked at me where Henri couldn't see. There would be cheese and fruit at his flat, and if we liked his coffee loud enough, he might make dinner. The street was crowded still. We let Jacob lead the tip of our phalanx as he thrust between the shoulders, and we trailed along in his wake. The sun fought through a hole in the clouds and peeked out over the tip of the cathedral. It painted the wet streets in ribbons of shimmering light. Sunday is nothing like this anywhere else, Jacob called over his shoulder. He stopped in the gathering humidity and noise, ignored the crowd as it bustled around us. After a moment, he moved on. There is a small shop on Montoya that has the right roast, shouted Henry. We'll stop there first. The Silver Urn was a cramped store filled floor to ceiling with bins of beans. Brown, red, black, gray and blue beans were stored along the walls in a series of square glass boxes with hinged doors. A tiny stepladder leaned against a door jamb in the rear. Henri dragged it over to a corner and scaled it, reaching up to a bin over his head. Good evening, Henri, said a voice from a wispy curtain in the back. Hello, Maya, said Henri without turning. A young slender woman slid from behind the red velvet curtain and ascended the ladder like a ballerina leaping into the arms of a lover. She clung to the edge, just her toes on the steps. Jacob pushed me aside and came a few inches away from her long muscled calf. You are here for the special beans? She asked. Yes, of course, Henri smiled like a schoolboy. She grabbed the lapel of his coat and slowly pulled him down the ladder one step at a time. It was a practiced move. Their faces came close together and I watched Henri's rapid breath come hard and fast. Jacob watched her hungrily, drinking in her tiny dark features, the up-tilted almond-shaped eyes that twinkled in his direction when she caught his stare. Henri's face twisted and he glared at Jacob but said nothing. Do you want to grind that at home or here? She asked. Henri glanced at Jacob. At home, please, he growled softly. She gathered the bag from his hands and added to it from several bins. I watched Henri glare at Jacob, who tracked the small woman glide around the room with practiced ease. Jacob glanced over his shoulder and smiled a wolfish grin. I'm going to have to learn about coffee. She giggled like a child, high and quiet, and checked them out. Henri refused the bag in an act of social consciousness and slipped the package into a pocket in his coat. He half dragged Jacob out of the store. You should have told me about her, Jacob commented. Why? Another notch to ruin? Henry, my friend, I'm hurt. You will be if you touch her. I'm falling back on the old classic I saw her first. Besides, her father and brother are both registered weapons. I once fought a village of pygmies in the Amazon, said Jacob. It was a small war, I added. He smirked. I can handle an old man and a kid if it comes to that. Besides, Henry, she's a woman who can make up her own mind. She's more than a woman to me, asshole, spit Henri. BG quote notwithstanding, Henri, what kind of beans did you get? I attempted to steer him off track and set myself between them. He glared over my shoulders at Jacob. It's a secret family recipe, he said. I can only tell my son or daughter. We know you're not going to have kids, Henry, Jacob chided. You have to be with a woman for that. What woman is going to let you in? So you'll just have to trust us. We're your best friends. You bastards, he scoffed. I couldn't trust you to raise the lid of my toilet, let alone kids. You don't even know good coffee. Coffee is just coffee, I sighed. Jacob and Henri bickered the entire way to his apartment, over coffee and women and traffic patterns and drivers. I tried changing the subject, but the two kept at it with the tenacity of two rams slamming heads together. Henri played the good host, making sure the large screen television was on before going into the kitchen to work his magic. After a few minutes, a warm nutty smell came through the Dutch door and we could hear the gurgle of an industrial espresso machine. I leaned into a worn leather chair, draped one leg over an arm and rested my hand on it, liking the feel of the supple leather on my back. I thought I might look wise, like a poet-philosopher, concentrating my face into a variety of expressions, lips pursed, eyes vacant. Jacob watched me with crinkled eyes and a half smile, probably waiting for me to say something, to wax philosophic, but I just shrugged my shoulders. It's almost ready, Henri called from the kitchen. The thick nuzzling aroma of brewing coffee floated through the door. We smiled at each other, anticipating the ambrosia Henri was concocting. He came in carrying the tray with 3 large mugs on it and a steaming clay pot. He set it on the table in front of me, waiting until I took a mug before giving Jacob his. I waited for the host to introduce the blend and comment on its conception, the smell surrounding us with lovely caresses. Gentlemen, Henri began. May I present real coffee? With that short introduction, Henri sipped from his beige mug and we followed his example. This is coffee, I emphasized. I have to agree, added Jacob. We looked at Henri, who cradled his cup like a wine glass, inspecting the hue, swirling it about and finally swishing his sip from cheek to cheek. I grinned when he finally swallowed. Well, if I do say so myself, he began. But do you know what would be good with this? Some pie. A warm piece of pecan pie. We looked at him and waited. Yes, Henry, a good slab of pie would do just nice, prodded Jacob. Too bad I don't have any here, said Henri. My stomach rumbled. Henri smiled. I could run to the bakery and grab one. We would prefer apple, Jacob said over a second warm sip. But I don't really feel up to it, Henri turned away from us. We could all go, I said, holding one hand across my stomach. The apartment was quiet, as if waiting for an answer. Henri lived in a well-to-do neighborhood that we envied. Noisy neighbors were figments of imagination here, post-gentrification that pushed crying babies and kids in the street several blocks away. His building was the quiet of a church. I don't feel up to do it at all, Henri was saying. I just think I'll finish out the day here. Jacob and I had bets as to why Henri was so mercurial in his mood swings. Jacob claimed it was his hormones. I allowed for a slight chemical imbalance, or latent hereditary trait. But we accepted them. We were his only friends, and he fed us often. All right, Henry, said Jacob. He drained his cup. We're going to Bourbon's and see who's who. If you feel better, I added. Meet us there. My stomach rumbled again, but we all had the grace to ignore it. Outside we stopped on Henri's stairs and looked up at his window. That's Henry. Always switching on us, muttered Jacob. He really needs to be medicated. The coffee was good, I said. Yeah, but I thought we would at least get some biscuits too. We both loved Henri's homemade biscuits, and the cheese that usually accompanied a pot of coffee at his place. Well, let's go then, I said. We walked up the street, each of us casting a glance over shoulder back up to the window. Henri stood in the pane, half hidden by the mosquito net curtains as he stared up the street. What the hell is he doing? Asked Jacob. That's new. We took our time leaving Henri's street on the off chance his mood would shift again and he would hustle up the street after us. Maybe he would apologize with dinner. Jacob pulled me into the shadow of a building. We had a good view of the street and Henri's shadow in the window. He looked our way but couldn't make us out in the dimness, or if he did, he ignored us. He waited a moment and disappeared. What is he doing? I whispered. Henri walked out of the door, but left it open behind him. Is he waiting for someone? Who is there besides us? Asked Jacob. Henri leapt down the steps and jogged up the street as Maya rounded the corner from the direction of her shop. Her? Asked Jacob. They gripped hands at the bottom of his stoop and looked at each other shyly. Henri pointed up at his window and they climbed the stairs. Come on, growled Jacob. I followed him around the side of the building and clambered up the wrought iron fire escape. Jacob motioned me to silence. Is this right? I whispered, but Jacob ignored me. He crept over to a window and eased it up slightly. He hunkered below it comfortably, like a man experienced with espionage. We could hear their conversation in the next room. Where are your friends? Her voice was cultured with a flavor of the Far East. I got rid of them when I found your note in the bean bag. She laughed at his small joke. Jacob and I groaned to each other. The tall one was very handsome. Jacob shot me a wink. He's not so great, said Henri. We could hear the pout in his voice. He doesn't know a thing about coffee. Coffee is not everything, she said. Jacob's shoulders shuddered as he fought in a giggle. Watching him almost sent me into a giggle fit, so I punched him. It caught him unawares. He fought against the pull of gravity to stay low and not pitch over the side of the fire escape. He won. He grinned over his shoulder at me. Poor Maya. She had uncorked the coffee speech. On the contrary, we heard Henri began. Coffee is a cultural icon. You can tell how much intellect a person possesses by their knowledge of coffee and. We peered over the edge of the window Will, two quiet Kilroys, to see what cut off the speech. She was kissing him. Jacob sputtered. What a waste, he snorted. Come on. He led the way back down the slick iron stairs and I thought we were off for Bourbons. I had to chase after him up the stoop and almost caught him before he leaned on the buzzer at Henri's flat. He glared at me and snorted again. I backed off. Jacob was as legendary for his temper as Henri was for tirades. A slightly disheveled Henri answered the door. Jacob threw an arm across his shoulder and turned him back into the apartment. Henry, old pal, we couldn't go anywhere without you, he laid it on. Let's grab your coat. He pushed Henri into the den as I followed after. Henri planted his heels and tried to block the way, but Jacob slid around him. Hey, a guest, he said in a lion's quiet voice. Henri turned the glare on me. I shrugged an apology. Mademoiselle Maya, Jacob purred. He took her hand and pressed it to his lips. A pleasure. The woman giggled. Jacob stared down at her, enraptured by the sound and by her moist coffee-colored eyes that stared back at him. Henry, said Jacob. You've been hiding from us. We were preparing to leave, said Henry. The glare moved to the back of Jacob's head. Henry, Jacob spoke as if to a child. We're your only friends. We share your job, your pain, your sorrow and your passion. He pressed the back of her hand to his lips again, staring over the ridge of flesh at Henri. You can come to dinner with us, Jacob continued. Both of you. The night holds many pleasures for us. He slipped a hand around Maya's waist and steered her toward the door. Henri screamed. It was primal and horrible and made the hair on my neck stand on edge. He pounded across the hardwood floors and launched himself into the couple. The trio bounced to the floor in an angry knot. Jacob had regaled us with half-convincing stories about Indians and alligators in his years in the Everglades. He tossed in occasional mentions of Africa or the Amazon, and we were pretty sure he had spent some time in Central America at one point. He told most stories with a mischievous glint in his eye, as if they were tall tales and he was far removed from the man who did the deeds. He proved at least a part of those stories true by rolling over Henri as they fell, and turning the momentum against him. He tossed Henri into a wall. He hit with a sickening thump and crumpled into a sobbing fetal position. I rushed over and lifted him into an overstuffed wing-back chair. Hell, Henry, Jacob shook his head. I'm sorry about that. These damn instincts, you know. Henri choked past a bloody nose. You heathen. You infidel. Thief. You take everything from me. You steal my food, my coffee, even the air I breathe. Can't I have anything of my own? Jacob reached down and helped Maya to her feet. She backed warily to the wall and watched the two men. Her eyes darted for the door as if planning her escape route. You take everything, Henri sobbed. Everything. You're stealing my life. I hate you. I hate you all. I patted him on the shoulder in an effort to console him and threw a look at Jacob. It didn't work. Easier to stop a hurricane than Jacob Earl irate. You pathetic little sodder, he stated. Get off your crying ass and sack up. You can't stand on your own 2 feet and you blame your friends? We're the only 2 people in the world who would bother to put up with you. Arrogant, prissy, know-it-all piece of work. I kept making cutting motions at my throat in an effort to stop Jacob, to shut him up or slow him down. It was pointless. Henri bowed his head under the onslaught, tears dripping from his face to the arm of a cushion. We're only here for your food, Henry. Your food and coffee, and damn sure not the company. You're boring. The only talent you have is in your cooking finger, and that's only good every 8 hours, and that's only when you're feeling generous. We tolerate you. Your friends tolerate you, you pompous arrogant us only because you feed us. We're whores, Henry. Goddamned friend whores. What does that say about you? About a man who has to buy friends? You bastard, Henri growled. He lunged from the chair and knocked me down when I tried to stop him. He slammed through the kitchen door. Jacob leaned over to help me up. I guess that's the end of that, he said. Henri, Maya screamed. I heard a loud thump and stared into Jacob's eyes as they crinkled. Shit, he muttered and fell onto me. We both crumpled to the floor. Henri stood over him, a dented pewter coffee pot in hand. He glared at Jacob, drool leaking from the corner of his mouth as he giggled. Henri, for God's sake, I yelled. Maya crouched in a corner. I shoved Jacob off me and crawled up Henri's legs. He shoved me back and away. Duck, Gabe, Jacob shouted. A crystal vase grew out of Henri's forehead a second before it shattered. He leaned back against the wall and slid down to the floor, a crimson river dribbled down the tear tracks from his eyes. I glanced over at Jacob. He teetered on the edge of the table and scraped a wooden chair out. He shrugged out of his jacket. The back of his shirt was soaked in blood from an open gash at his hairline. Get up, Gabe, he said in a calm voice. Call 911. He sat on the edge of his seat and put his head between his knees, a familiar position to fight off nausea. I fumbled out a cell phone and dialed. The toilet is down the hall, I said to Maya. Get a towel. She retrieved two and planted one gently on the back of Jacob's head. He reached up and put a hand on hers to hold it there. I took the other, held it to Henri's face. He lost it, I said. I tried to talk to him about that once. Jacob swallowed a grimace. About what? Maya cooed. I told him it was time to switch to decaf. He's wound too tight for the regular stuff afternoon. It didn't feel right to laugh, but we did anyway. The EMTs arrived in short order. Jacob hauled himself onto a stretcher, and passed out in the effort. Maya volunteered to ride with him. I climbed in the rig with Henri. A police unit showed up while we were loading and said they would meet us at the emergency room. I found Maya answering questions as fast as she could while we waited on an update from the doctor. Jacob was in surgery. The pewter pot had cracked the bone. How's Henri? She asked first, which made me like her more. It's like someone who is kind to animals and small children, you can't help but think they're a good person inside. They think he's going to be okay. They'll keep him overnight, observe for concussion. I lowered my voice as we stepped away from the two uniforms who were distracted by the nurse's station. In the morning, they'll transfer him into a ward for a 72-hour watch. This isn't his first time here. That doesn't sound like he's okay, she said. I think it's a brain chemistry thing, I shrugged. One of the officers drifted over to finish up a report. He was interrupted by Jacob's doctor, a harried-looking scarecrow with a badge that identified him as Patel. I didn't really know what to make of it, he said. There was a lot of blood. I thought he was shot. There are so many scars, I didn't know where to go in first. I just followed the blood. He's going to be okay. He told me he's had bug bites worse than this. He's in recovery now, and you should be able to see him in about an hour or so. I shook Patel's soft hands, and Maya wrapped me in a hug, which I returned but with less enthusiasm than she. I'm glad he'll be okay, she said. Henri or Jacob? I tested. Both, she said quickly. Jacob. The doctor was right. Jacob is one tough son of a gun. Henri though, all the way over here they kept trying to sedate him. He was babbling about different types of beans. You ought to check in on him before you leave. It might do some good. I can't, she shivered. Not after what he did. I never would have suspected Henri capable of something like this, I said. If Jacob wasn't lying in a hospital bed, I would have chalked it up to one of the stories he liked to tell at Bourbon's. This should be a good one, she said. He's got 1,000 of them. Entertainment for hours. He was either a spy or a photographer or maybe even worked for the Peace Corps, depending on the day you ask. I can't wait to hear them, she said and settled on the seat beside me. Can I get you a coffee? I blurted out without thinking. She quirked up one eyebrow. Can you make mine a tea? She smirked. I came back with 2 paper cups of hot tea and we sat together waiting for the time to pass until we could go check on our friend. The end.